Anybody gone camping this year? Yeah? Did you go camping near water? Anybody go cliff diving this year? Jump off a cliff into the water? Or did you see anybody who went cliff diving? Even Liam didn't go cliff diving. All right, you've probably seen it before. Imagine that moment when maybe you've done it in your life, you're up on top of a big rock and you're looking down into the water. Maybe it's 30, 40 feet below you. And you've gone down, you've scouted it out, you've looked at that water, you made sure it's deep enough. You know you're going to be okay if you jump. You've watched other people jump into that water and they were perfectly fine. And what do you feel like in that moment? If you're me or you're normal, you feel terrified in that moment. Am I really going to just push off of this rock and let my body free fall through the air into the water? You gear yourself up and you get the courage. You've got people behind you making fun of you and telling you, you're going to really hear it if you don't jump. So finally, with all this peer pressure, you jump and you release control. Once you've jumped off that cliff, unless you are some kind of crazy gymnast, you have no control of what's going to happen to your body. You have to trust that you're going to fall into the water and be caught and be okay. And then you hit the water, and it's like the whole world changes, isn't it? In that moment, you go from being hot and in the air, and boom, it's a whole new world under the water, refreshing, cool, clean. And you come up and catch a breath, and how do you feel then? Come on, let me hear how you feel once you've jumped off a cliff into the water and you survived. You're pumped. Whoo, I made it. I lived, and I did it. Into the water. We're going to see some people go into the water in just a few minutes. The waters of baptism. All right, let's talk for a minute about Jesus. Who is Jesus and why are Christians always talking about him? They're always talking about him basically because he is the best. That's it. Because he is the best. Now, let me tell you what I mean. A couple of thousand years ago, this guy shows up on the scene in Israel, and he starts doing miracles. That's the first thing that attracted people to come and check him out or listen to him. He starts healing people, doing things no one else could do. But that isn't the main thing that eventually made millions and then billions of people follow him with their whole life. In addition to the fact that he did miracles, he taught people. This is the main thing they called him at first, was a teacher. And his teaching transforms human life in a positive way like no other teaching ever given to our human race. His teaching is the foundation of Western civilization, actually the foundation of civilization all over the world now. His teaching made sense of human life, and it makes life work. We can't get into all of those teachings, but you probably know some of them. Things like the golden rule. Do to other people what you would want them to do to you. No one in all of history had ever thought of doing that. Do to other people whatever you can. That was the rule before Jesus came. His teachings were to forgive people, to love even your enemies. And his teachings have transformed and continue to transform the world. But hey, even his teaching is not the thing that made people really want to give their whole life to follow him. What really transformed the people around him and made them want to follow him more than anything else was who he was and what it was like to be around him. Some of you guys who are here know what it's like to be around him and who he really is. I'll give you two aspects of what he was like. He was a man who was astonishingly full of faith. That's the first thing I'll say about him. People noticed that when he was around, he had, the only word that they came up to describe it was a kind of peace. Everybody say peace. He had a peace about him that you could feel when he walked in the room. And when he left, you could feel it leave. He also was never worried. Can you imagine a human being who was never worried about anything? A couple illustrations to show you what I mean. One time, he was on a boat, and the boat was about to sink because there was a massive storm. And everyone on the boat were experienced fishermen, and they were terrified for their own lives. So everyone was about to die. And some of you know, what was Jesus doing in that moment? He was sound asleep. So unworried was he about his own life. And when he woke up, he said, "What are you afraid of? Why are you afraid? God is in control of everything. You should never fear anything." He also was a man who was able to stare death in the face. Many times people tried to kill him, and he had no fear in the face of death. Incredible peace, hope in every situation, no worry or fear. Imagine a human life like that. But the greatest thing about him is that he overflowed with love. Even his enemies, even people that he had to oppose because they were doing things that were wrong, felt like he loved them. He overflowed with love. His love was palpable. It was something you could feel. He would meet people who were, down and out, drug addicted, into all kinds of difficult situations, or just really, really selfish. And only after being around him for a short time, just being in his presence, many of those people's lives did a 180 overnight just by being around him. The early people who knew him, his friends at that time, they were trying to come up with words to describe, who is this guy? What is he like? The best things that they came up to describe just how good he is were these two things. Number one, they called him Lord. They said, you know what? We think this guy is the one who's actually in control of everything that's going on in the world. We think he actually might be God. And the other thing that they said about him is that they called him the Son of God. Imagine what those words mean if you were saying that about someone who you actually knew, a person who was in front of you. What must that person have been like? So that's what he was like. Now, how did people respond to him? They responded basically in two ways. I'm going to give you 2.5 ways that people responded to him. First of all, just to be around him was very convicting. If you were doing things that were wrong in your life and you were around this guy, it made you feel like you shouldn't be doing those things. And how do you think some people responded to that? They responded to it by hating him, by wanting to kill him, actually, and in the end, by killing him. That's how they responded. But the other way people responded, and if you read those testimonies, those stories of people who are going to be baptized in a few minutes, you will see some of these very responses in those stories. The other way that people responded to him is once they were around him, they didn't want anything else other than to be around him all the time. You're going to see that especially in Taya's testimony. I encourage you to read all of them. Once they experienced what it was like to be around him, they said, being away from him is like death by comparison. All I want is to be around this guy all the time. And so one of the ways that the Bible describes it is imagine you were a person who had been in the desert for a long time and you were dying of thirst. What would it feel like to encounter a clear, flowing stream of water, cool, refreshing, to a person who's dying of thirst? That's how they described what it was like to be around Jesus. But then, and here's the 2.5, people had this response that many people wanted to do nothing but be around him all the time, except that they felt like they weren't good enough even to stand in his presence. One of his closest friends was a man named Peter. And Peter at first wanted to do nothing but follow him. But after he had lived or been around Jesus for a little while, there's this moment where Peter falls down on the ground on his face, and he says, I am full of evil. I am full of death and darkness. I don't even deserve to be in your presence. I want nothing but to be around you, but I'm not good enough to be around you. But here's what Jesus did, and this is really the reason we're here today talking about this, is he said, Peter, I'm going to make a way that not only can you be around me, but you can become more and more like me. He said that way is going to cost a lot. In fact, what I'm going to have to do is die. I'm going to have to allow myself to be killed on a Roman cross. But by dying on that cross, I'm going to make a way that you can be around me. All the bad stuff that you've done is going to be forgiven and wiped away. And you're going to be able to live a life with me forever, even when you can't see me physically here anymore. And that's what we're here for today. That there is a way that is open because of what Jesus has done to actually know him. All those things that I said about what it was like to be with him when he was here on earth and how people responded to him, that's still what it's like to be with him today. Today. And that's still how people are responding to him today. Who he is, that's why there are billions of people around the world who have said, my life is defined by the fact that I follow Jesus. And that's what we're going to see in a few minutes here when we have baptism, is people, and in those stories, you're going to see people who, it's not just that they learned about Jesus, it's that they encountered him. He showed up in their lives. They did things, and you'll see in those stories, they said, they came to a place where they said, God, I want to know if you're real. Just show me. If you're real, show up in my life. And they really meant it. And when you do that, God always responds. If you pray that prayer and you mean it from your heart, he will respond and show up in your life, and you will know that he's real. You will experience the presence of Jesus himself. And then, let me warn you though, you're going to be ruined because you're not going to want anything else. That's going to be the core of your life from then on. And what we're going to see in a minute here is these people are going to take a plunge of baptism. And what that is they're going public with the fact that this has happened to them. And they are committing to follow Jesus for the rest of their lives. And actually not just for the rest of their lives, but forever. Because if you follow Jesus, death really isn't a thing anymore. It's just gone.